Greetings, salutations, respect, and love. I am Scott. You, my dear friends, have wandered into the Prog Corner where today I'm going to be doing one of my favorite things, which is stealing other people's episode ideas. Yeah, I'm pretty famous for doing that, but unlike a lot of people, I actually give credit where credit is due, and this episode is a direct ripoff of the episode that the Contrarians dropped earlier today. Yeah, so I am doing bands with one album that I like. This is a tough one. I seen this episode, the Contrarians, popped it up like, an upcoming episode. And it really got me thinking, what are the bands that only have one album that I like? And you start thinking about it, and the first thing that comes to mind are bands with only one album, right? Like Derek and the Dominoes, or the Sex Pistols, or Storm Corrosion, or Con Space Shanty, something like that. And then my mind started going to all these bands with only two albums, where one of them was a seminal record and the other one was kind of forgettable. Bands like Neutral Milk Hotel or Television or the Stone Roses come to mind. So I'm doing a 3-album rule. These bands have to have 3 albums out for them to be included. Bands with only one good album. This is my opinion. I almost went with Motley Crue, but then I realized they actually have 2 albums I like. I do like the first 2, and I found a whole bunch of bands where I liked exactly 2 albums. Finding bands where I only liked one was actually hard because I found a lot where there was one album that I really, really liked, and then 2 or 3 that I kind of sort of liked. So very difficult. This was a lot harder than I thought. So as a result, I'm going to do this in alphabetical order today, and I'm starting with Anathema. A band I never really got into that much. They started out as kind of a black metal kind of thing, and then they kind of, turned a little more stonery, and they started getting more and more prog with each album. But by the time their 9th album, Weather Systems, came out, I really like that album. I love Untouchables Part 1 and 2, but this is the only Anathema album that I really, really like, so it's on the list. Next up, Asia. Yeah, I know a lot of people like some of their latter day stuff, like, Triple X and Phoenix and Omega. Some people really like, Alpha and Astra and some of the earlier stuff. I only like the debut. I'm going to be honest, it's the only one that really rings my bell. 1982 is the biggest album of 1982, hit #1. It's a great record, but after that, it got pretty commercial, and I kind of lost interest. Next up, from Italy, Luciano Basso, who put out an amazing album in 1976 called Vaci. Just such an incredible record, and then every record after that got more and more classical to the point where it wasn't even rock and roll anymore. But that debut album from Luciano Bassi, oh my goodness gracious, amazing. You have to hear it if you haven't heard it already. Next up, from 1976. Yeah, a lot of these are going to be debut albums, I've noticed. It's Boston. Yeah, their first album was just dynamite. Every track on it is just incredible. And then we waited forever for a second album, and it just wasn't that good. And by the time Third Stage came out, Boston was terrible. I do kind of sort of like the second album, but let's be honest. That first album is so good. It just definitely, casts a shadow on everything else the band ever did. Next up, another debut album, this time from 1994. It's a UK band called Bush, and they dropped their debut album, 16 Stone, and this boy was in love with it, man. Everything Zen. Oh, man, I just fell in love with them. I went and saw them in concert that year. I just was a huge, huge fan. And then they dropped their second album, Razorblade Suitcase, and I fell off the bandwagon really, really fast. But I still really, really like the first Bush album. Let's talk about another debut album, this time from 2008, and it's Fleet Foxes. Oh, man, their first EP was solid, really, really good. And then their first album was just dynamite, amazing. Every album since has been garbage, and I haven't liked it at all. But the vocal harmonies, the songwriting, everything was just on point with that first Fleet Foxes album. I miss it. I wish they'd go back to doing stuff like that. Next up, one that I know you guys had to guess was going to be on the list. It's the Grateful Dead, and the only album I like from them is, of course, Terrapin Station. The band's 9th album from 1977. It is their prog album, absolutely, particularly the Sidelong Suite. I just love it. I think it's an amazing album. Man, if Grateful Dead had done albums like Terrapin Station, they'd definitely be one of my favorite bands of all time. Next up, another debut album from this time from 1987 over in LA, a band called Guns N' Roses. Dropped their debut album, Appetite for Destruction, and I grudgingly have to accept that this is a really good album. It's got great songs. When it first came out, nobody cared about it. It took about a year for this album to really start gaining traction and people start listening to it. It took a little bit of time for those singles like Sweet Child of Mine and those great tunes to actually kind of get a little bit of traction in the U.S. But after that, Guns N' Roses was just a spent force, absolutely. Next up, another debut album. It's Heart from 1975, Dreamboat Annie. Don't kill me, but it's the only album by them I actually like. Dog and Butterfly's all right. BB Lestrange is all right. Magazine was all right. But you get into the 80s, and it just got terrible really, really fast. But Dreamboat Annie is awesome, man. Every song on there is beautiful, perfect. The guitar work from Nancy, the singing from Ann, the old band was just killing it. Just fantastic stuff. Next up, another female-fronted band from the Pacific Northwest. Only this time it's Hole. And their second album, Live Through This. Oh, man, I don't like Courtney Love at all. I think she's an absolute gold digger. She's a terrible human being. She probably killed Kurt Cobain, but the one thing she didn't do is kill those songs, because I guarantee you that every song on this whole album was written by Kurt Cobain. It sounds exactly like Nirvana. It's a dynamite album. Everything they did after that was terrible because, Courtney couldn't steal Dude Man song ideas, I guess. Next up, I'm going with another alternative band who dropped their second or third album? It's Jane's Addiction and Ritual de la Habitual. Their third album, actually their second studio album, because this is a band that their first album was a live album. Who does that, right? Who puts your first album out as a live album, but it was actually pretty good? So I'm not including it since it's not a studio album. I do like it, but the only studio album by Jane's Addiction I like is Ritual de la Habitual. Yes, their prog album too, so go figure. Next up, 1979 was a big year for power pop, and a band called The Knack came up from out of nowhere with hits like My Sharona and Good Girls Dump, and the misogynistic nature of those songs kind of rubbed people the wrong way, and I totally get it, but spend a minute and listen to, what's his name, Gary Bruce, I think is his name, the drummer. Oh my, that dude might have the tightest pocket I've ever heard in the history of drumming, and there's a reason why he became the go-to session drummer for years and years and years after the Knack broke up out in LA. Just amazing. And the first Knack album, Get the Knack, it was all recorded in one take too, man. Just an amazing album. I love it. It's fantastic. Everything after that was absolute garbage. Next up, 1973, another debut album. This is the one that was making a lot of people's lists, and how can you argue when you have a debut album as strong as Montrose's? And then nothing after that came even close. Yeah, 1973, talk about being way ahead of your time, man. Ronnie Montrose with the Sammy Hagar and Ted Templeton produced, kind of, pointing the way to what Van Halen would be doing later on. But that debut album from Montrose, just a monster album, and nothing he ever did came even close. Yeah, next up, let's talk about Nazareth. This might get a little pushback, but honestly, the only album I like, you know which one it is. It's their sixth album from 1975, Hair of the Dog. It's got that amazing album cover. It's got the great songs on there. I was absolutely in love with this album when I bought this, and I went out and I bought like 4 or 5 other Nazareth albums, and I didn't like any of them, man. I really didn't. Absolutely not. Just terrible. But man, Hair of the Dog is just a fantastic record. Next up, let's go back to the Pacific Northwest and a band called Pearl Jam. I absolutely hated their first album. I thought 10 was terrible. I didn't like the second album, but something funny happened along the way. That third album, Vitalogy from 1994, actually a great album. I don't know how or why, because I don't like anything else this band ever did. But their third album, Vitalogy, is actually dynamite, really strong all the way through. Next up, it's Liz Phair. Oh, man, here's one that went from the highest of heights to just pure trash in exactly 2 albums. Her debut album, Exile in Guyville, just a phenomenal album. Spicy, saucy, naughty, but the songs were tight. interesting, very cool. I loved it. And then she just went off and fell off the deep end, and I don't care about Liz Phair at all anymore. Next up, Shadowfax. Hey, yeah, let's talk about Shadowfax. This is a band back in 1976, dropped their debut album, A Waterway Course. And then a few years later, they would get signed by a upstart new age label called Windham Hill, and they totally changed their sound, and they became super boring and horrible. But that first Shadowfax album, man, you gotta hear it. It's so good. Only good album they got. Next up, it's The Strokes and another debut album, this time from 2001. Is This It? What a phenomenal album, man. I loved it. I fell in love with The Strokes hard, and I just wanted them to keep doing records like that. And that's their only good album, man, and I love every track off of that debut, but the rest of their discography kind of leaves me cold, and I'm not real super thrilled with it. Next up, our penultimate pick here today. Yes, we are going alphabetical, in case you forgot. It is Billy Thorpe's Children of the Sun, the great Australian guitarist and singer. Dropped his third album in 1979, and it was amazing. It was so good, man. I went back and I listened to a bunch of other Billy Thorpe stuff, and it's just not good at all. So if there's ever a guy that fits the template for this particular topic, it's absolutely Billy Thorpe and Children of the Sun. And finally, I know a lot of people dig deep into this band's catalog, but me, I stopped right at their 1983 debut, and that's the Violent Femmes. From Milwaukee, Wisconsin. They were discovered by Chrissie Hynde. I guess Chrissie and the Pretenders were playing a gig in Milwaukee, and there was these buskers, right? They're just on a street corner playing, and Chrissie's like, hey, you guys are awesome. You're opening for me tonight. And the rest, as they say, is history. And that first Violent Femmes album is great. I know they've got fans that really like their later day stuff. I didn't like it at all. I thought it just ventured into country music, and it just bored me to tears. But that first Violent Femmes album is just amazing. Anyway, tomorrow, boys and girls, we are going to be doing an album review of a brand new album from the Age of Distraction. Yeah, it's my boy John Cook and Charlie Bramall. They've been on the program before, so I am going to be reviewing their debut album. And then Wednesday, I am going to be ranking the albums of the Cardiacs. You've asked for it, so I'm going to give it to you. Yeah, we're getting back to pure prog here on the Prog Corner after a couple of diversions, but I thank you guys for sticking with me. You know what time it is. You know what side of the toast gets the butter. Absolutely. Anyway, I love you guys. Peace in the Middle East. Free the Ukraine, and God save the king. Save him. Save King Chucky. Chucky the Third needs your saving. That boy's got the cancer, so bring him to America. Bring that boy to America. We got some good doctors here, and we can lay hands on him. Oh, yeah, we will. And we'll do some spells and some prayers and some incantations. Oh, yeah, then we're going to drink poison. And then you know what we're going to do? We're going to dance with them snakes. Oh, yeah, we're going to dance with them snakes. And King Chucky will be just fine. I'll see you punks tomorrow when we review The Age of Distraction, Game of Whispers. See you tomorrow. Peace.